Have you ever worried about slipping in the bathroom or helping a loved one get up safely? You need to know about Safety Grip. Unlike outdated smooth metal grab bars, Safety Grip has a unique textured design that gives a better grip and more control, especially for those with weak or tired hands. It looks great, feels secure, and installs just like a regular bar. Visit heartmobility.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Aging Together podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, an occupational therapist with board certification in gerontology and additional specialty certifications in dementia and fall prevention. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields and caregivers who share their lived experiences. Let's meet today's guest. Amy Martin Quinn is a seasoned communications executive and board-certified patient advocate who brings empathy, strategy, and clarity to both corporate and healthcare environments. With more than 25 years of experience in communications, including as Assistant Vice President of Corporate Communications and Public Affairs, Amy has built a career around helping people understand complex systems and make informed decisions. Her pivot into patient advocacy was inspired by personal experience, navigating breast cancer, supporting her daughter's mental health journey, guiding her father through Parkinson's disease, and helping her mother manage heart disease. These experiences deepened her passion for helping others through the emotional and logistical challenges of the healthcare system. Amy now uses her communication expertise to empower patients and families, translating medical jargon, streamlining insurance and billing issues, and ensuring people feel confident and heard in their healthcare decisions. Her work centers on making care more accessible, less overwhelming, and deeply human. She holds an MBA from the University of Georgia and a BA from St. Joseph's University. Amy lives in Atlanta with her husband and youngest daughter, while her two older daughters attend college. A former collegiate track champion, she still finds joy in chasing personal bests. Amy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
What a journey you've been on.
Oof, indeed. Very interesting 20 years. Thankfully, there's been more good than bad, but I really have embraced the concept of radical acceptance. I wish I had understood that better earlier in this journey, because it's just helped me better navigate all of these things that feel like they're coming at me from all directions at any given time. So I talk a lot about what it's like to be in the sandwich generation. And as my bio noted, I have helped my parents. Unfortunately, I lost my mom last February. But helping my parents, my youngest daughter had pretty significant mental health challenges, navigating that. And then, of course, my own health issues related to breast cancer. So I'm 8 weeks post my 5th surgery in 7 years.
Oh my goodness. And you're still showing up with a smile on your face. And I know we're going to talk a lot about, your whole perspective on radical acceptance, but we're also here to talk about that sandwich generation that we don't talk enough about, right? Especially as we see a population that is living longer in illness, not in wellness, right? And so they need help and support. And they're still young children because we're having kids later. So
exactly.
It's both ends of the spectrum, right? It's not like, okay, you're 40 years old, your kids are 20 or teen, they can take care of themselves and your parents are still relatively okay, but they might need help, but you're not also caring for young kids. Now it's like, okay, you're 40, but you probably have a 10-year-old or younger, and you also have parents in their 70s who need help. And it becomes, a lot more difficult to manage. And usually we're at the height of our careers in your 40s.
Well, and for women, we are in the range of menopause, which is also not talked about enough and wreaks havoc on all of the systems in your body.
Yeah, I have someone coming in to speak on that a little later. But yes, absolutely. There's just so much that gets thrown at us at the decade of 40s. It's like one thing after another, I think, that probably gets thrown at you. So you've cared for both of your parents at one point while raising your daughters, one of whom faced, like you mentioned, significant mental health challenges. Can you share what a typical day or season in that chapter of life looked like? Or maybe a typical week, because sometimes it's not all in a day.
Well, what I want you to know too, though, is that my mother's health challenges were quite lengthy over a couple of decades. My father was in perfect health until after she passed away, and he's just declined significantly since then. So that's been doubly hard, right? Another element of caring for my parents is that I don't live in the same town as them. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm from Newport, Rhode Island. And so caring for them from a distance. There are huge advantages that we have today that we know we didn't have 30 years ago. I'm able to join many of that doctor's appointments over the phone or via video teleconference, but there has also been times when I've had to jump on a plane and come up in an emergency situation. Let me back up a little bit. So I was working full-time in corporate communications. I worked for a company for almost just shy of 20 years. And I was very lucky because the company I worked for was extremely family oriented and very supportive. And, I also could do my job, not fully present, but I could do my job if I had to travel. But I do have 3 girls, and raising them has been the greatest joy of my life, but it's also the hardest job you'll ever have. My youngest daughter, pretty early on, when she was about 3 or 4 years old, she started presenting with separation anxiety, blood curdling screaming when we try to leave her at daycare, peeling her out of the car going to school. So she started in therapy in 2nd grade. And my older 2 daughters also have anxiety as well. And so we weren't unfamiliar with the benefits of therapy. So my youngest daughter, we were navigating all of that, handling it fairly well, relatively speaking. And then came middle school. And then came the increasing challenges with my mother's health. So she had a pretty significant stroke in 2019. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2018. And then my mom had her stroke, the first stroke, in 2019. And my youngest is in middle school, high anxiety, not feeling very supported in the middle school, right? Just a significant combination of challenges. With respect to my daughter, we were continuing with therapy, increased the frequency to once a week, trying to show her, how much support she did have at home, and then trying to be there for my mom as much as I could. Throw the pandemic in the middle of that. Didn't get to see my parents for quite a while. And so I think it's probably best to just wrap up this portion of this experience by saying I definitely felt like I was, and you can't see it here, but I was Gumby. I was being pulled in 2 directions, right? Getting the call that my mother's in the hospital with a stroke. I need to jump on a plane to get there. And my youngest daughter's having significant challenges in middle school. It doesn't end. The unfortunate thing is there was no solve to either one of those situations. I mean, in the end, my mother passed away, and I'm still terribly grieving that loss. And my youngest daughter also took that extremely hard. I still grieve for my mother. So that I may not be caring for her, but now I'm navigating that grief. I will say that after my mother's death, my daughter had another episode of, she was dealing with suicide ideation. And her therapist, we had tried a couple of programs in 2023. And then after my mom died, she started to have a really difficult time again. And her therapist recommended a partial hospitalization program for her. And it was the best thing that could have happened at that time. And the therapist said this. She said, Amy, you need a break. You need to stop trying to handle this on your own. Let more professionals get involved and help with this. And so in that regard, that was good. I said earlier, my father was in perfect health until after my mom died. I think the lowest point I've had in my sandwich generation experience was sitting at my computer on family therapy. So my daughter's at this program 8 to 5, 5 days a week for a month. And once a week you did family therapy, parents joined by Zoom. And I'm on the computer hearing my daughter's crying, talking about how hard things are. And I get the phone call that my dad had fallen and he was being taken to the emergency room because he broke his shoulder. And I looked up at God and said, I cannot take any more.
I'm tearing up just listening to you. I mean, I feel like, whew, that's a lot.
And I'm extremely fortunate. I have a husband. We just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. He's incredibly supportive. And so, I mean, I've said this for as long as I've been advocating for different areas of mental and physical health. I don't know how people do it who don't have support systems, right? I mean, I'm just incredibly, incredibly lucky to have a good support system. And even now today, my father's now in a nursing home, and they tell us all the time because we're in there visiting, and they're like, some people have nobody to come visit them ever.
There's so much you've touched on that I can relate with. So my parents live 900 miles away, and they're getting older, and my grandma is older too. She lives with them. And like I tell people all the time, like last year I had to fly home 5 times because something happened. During the pandemic, I didn't see them for 18 months. I mean, I feel that, and like, I'm fortunate that I didn't have kids at that time. I don't have kids right now. And I have that ability and flexibility to jump on a plane and, go do that. I can't imagine how much harder that is with not just 3 children, but then children who need you supportively. And that's just a lot. So kudos to you for getting through that. And kudos to that therapist for telling you to take a break. This is something that I talk a lot about with the caregivers I speak with. And it's really about, okay, how can we find you support and resources and systems that will give you a break, right? And taking a break does not mean that you're a bad caregiver. It does not mean if you're feeling better, if you're better supported, you will take better care of this person, right? Whether it's a kid or whether it's an adult, right? You can't fill from an empty cup, right? We say this all the time, and that applies on both ends.
What I would tell you about that is, so when I had my first daughter in 2003, I had pretty severe postpartum OCD. So very focused on her care, right? And people told me then, if you're on a plane, you put the oxygen on the mother first, you've got to be able to serve yourself. And it didn't stick. That didn't take at all. Nearly 20 years later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I don't know what it was, but I definitely, people said, you need to allow people to help you. You need to allow people to help you. And my friend set up a meal train. Another friend set up Uber, as in breast cancer, Uber for my children, like helping them get to all of their appointments and games and sports, etc. And that release then has stuck with me. And okay, I'm going to let people help me. I learned then probably what I should have learned 2003, that when you're going through something as significant as having a baby, recovering from surgery, etc., you need the help. And so to that end, I've learned that I definitely need to just let other people fill my cup when I'm not able to fill it for myself.
I love that. Having a good community around you makes or breaks your entire experiences. So I'm so glad that they created the Boober, the meal train.
I know, wasn't that funny?
I love that. Another great point with that, and I mention it because specifically you mentioned not realizing that until you got sick, is what happens if something happens to you? When you're the primary caregiver and you are taking the ownership and handling everything without letting anybody else help you, what happens when something happens to you, right? And I think there's this idea of you're immortal, that nothing's going to happen to you and you can just keep going, right? And that's not true.
As I mentioned, I just coming off of my 5th surgery since 2018. I had a mass on my ovaries. And so I had to go in and get them both taken out. And my father was also scheduled to have, he had the procedure. He had a shunt put in his brain. He's been diagnosed with normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is what Billy Joel was just diagnosed with. And he had that put in. And then the day before I was having my surgery, I got a phone call and he had a brain bleed and they had to rush him to the hospital 45 minutes away. And then I couldn't do anything about it, right? I was literally showing up to my hospital the next day at 5:00 in the morning. So you said, what happens when you're not available? People figure it out. right? There was literally nothing I could do about it, right? And so that was also a lesson for other people, not just for me, but for other people. Like other people can do these things. Other people can show up. I mean, it's been tricky. I don't know if I'll send this to my brother or not, but I have to tell one story. So when he gets rushed, he gets rushed to the emergency room. So they had actually called him first, and he just flipped the voicemail to me without listening to it. And then I listen and I call back, and it's like, okay. And my brother was on an airplane, and they hadn't taken off yet, so he had to get off the airplane. And he calls me when he gets to the ER, and my brother is an extremely successful salesperson, travels the world, highly competent, right? But he gets to the emergency room and he calls me and he says, "I'm here. Now what?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, do I just go to his room or do I said, "Well, you could, or you could talk to the nurse's station and see." So then he does that. And then he messages me like an hour later and says, "Can you message the doctor on the portal and ask them to come to the room?" And I said, "Or you can go out to the nurse's station and ask them to come to the room." Right. So there's definitely this reliance on me that perhaps I created it. I don't know, but that was ironic to me that a highly capable business executive didn't know how to function in the hospital. And to the point about what I talked about in my bio, patient advocacy, it is overwhelming for people. So, but as it relates to me and my personal journey, I had to not be involved and see what happens when I'm not around.
We'll be right back. Quick pause. Are you caring for a loved one? Recharge inside the Aging Together Caregiver Hub, our free online community packed with expert tips, live Q&As, and peers who truly get it. Join in seconds at aging-together.com, then dive back into the show feeling supported.
I want to tell you that you are not alone in that experience. We have, within our space, there's a lot of like memes and reels that you see where people act out an adult daughter bringing her mom to the hospital or a doctor's appointment versus an adult son, and how like the daughter comes in with a binder with all the information and all the medications and like knows everything. And then the son comes in and he's on his phone. He doesn't know a single thing. He didn't even bring anything. And I think part of it is cultural, right? Part of it is how men are raised. And I say this not lightly, but, weaponized incompetence, like, if you can be that successful, you can figure it out, right? Like, so you're like choosing not to.
There's also something that my friends who are in the same boat, daughters, who notice, and this has happened with my dad, and I don't want us to get way too off track, but always asking for my brother. Is he coming today? Is he coming today? It's like, is it not enough that I'm here? And it's a pattern. Like, it's literally in talking to several friends who are dealing with this. There's something about these fathers, they're noting that the sons are not as present. But
yeah, for sure. So I want to focus a little bit more on you before we jump into some of the other stuff we talked about. You received this breast cancer diagnosis in the middle of all this other stuff that was going on, right? Your mom was already sick or battling certain things. Your dad was still okay, but you had daughters who needed help and support, especially your youngest one. What helped you specifically get through your breast cancer experience while still showing up for everyone else around you? Even with all those supports in place, you still showed up, right? And what was that like? How did you do that?
Well, first I want to tell you that I never in a million years thought I'd get breast cancer, which the reality is statistically and scientifically, it was all there. So I actually had my first lumpectomy at 22. I had a very large, benign lump. I didn't have health care for the job that I was working in right out of college. So I ignored this lump, and I regret that it was not cancerous, but it definitely was not something I recommend anybody ever do. So I had my first one back to me in 1999, and then I had 2 more biopsies. My mother had breast cancer in 1996. And so I always assumed that because I was healthy and athletic and that I took care of myself in a way that our mothers weren't raised or known how to do that. My mom started smoking at age 14. I thought, nope, I'm not going to get breast cancer. My mother's breast cancer was because of her, lack of focus on her health in her early years. Well, the reality is I got it earlier than my mother did, and it was bigger, right? And so as my oncologist says, because I did the genetic testing, I'm not positive for, there's actually now 13 genes related to breast cancer, not just the 2. And my oncologist says they just haven't found the genetic connection for you yet, right? So it was there. So I will tell you that when I was first diagnosed, I was angry. This was not part of the plan. I did not anticipate this. I had just gotten a big promotion at work. I was thriving in my new job. And, and the words from the doctor were, I'm afraid we do have something going on. So what got me through was a meditation practice, primarily focused on my Catholic faith of saying Hail Marys, like repeatedly. But then the second thing was my village. I mean, we had a cooler on the porch and people were just dropping off food, dropping off treats, drinks, etc. My youngest daughter, she actually made bracelets. She was making these like pink elastic bracelets, and there was a jar on them on the table on the porch, and everyone who came by picked them up and was wearing them, and people were taking pictures of them and sending them. We had moved to Atlanta in 2012, and this diagnosis came in 2018. We had friends, great friends. Like I remember in particular, a mom signed up to make us a meal whose child was in my daughter's 3rd grade class. I didn't know who she was because unfortunately, like I was working all the time, traveling. I didn't know who she was. And she was willing to make a meal for me, right? That kindness, that level of support. Oftentimes, if, say, my husband was taking my one daughter to a soccer game, he had people come and sit with me. And I got to the point where I didn't need that level of help, but people were like, no, we want to come bring you muffins and coffee and just talk. And so that, I couldn't believe it. And I don't know if it's a product of where we live or what, but that absolutely carried me because we didn't have family. My mom did come down. My mom came for my surgery and stayed for 2 weeks. And then she left. And then my dad came back for Christmas. In the meantime, my mother-in-law had come down, but I didn't have family. And this just huge squad of people showed up.
And that's where you live matters, right?
Yes.
And the community aspect of it and who's available, who shows up and how willing they are to show up. I mean, that's beautiful. So you lost your mother in February. For those of you listening in, it's currently July of 2025. So you lost your mother in February while you were still in the middle of caregiving because you're still caring for your youngest daughter, right? You're parenting, you're healing from your own diagnosis. I know you mentioned you just had surgery and you're still going through the appointments. You touched on this earlier, but the grieving, when you don't really have the time or the space to process it because you have all these other obligations. And I guess I forgot to ask, are you still working? Like, is that still at the height of the list, right? Because I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah, no, I had the opportunity to take a package from the company I worked for at the end of last year, and combination of a lot of things. At the time I said I was doing it for my career, but I did not realize that I'd end up having to, my father went to the hospital September 26th of 2024 and has never come home. He's went hospital, rehab, assisted living, and now he's in a nursing home. So it's, that definitely the grieving process is complicated. And I knew from my breast cancer journey that it actually can hit you when you least expect it. I remember running or participating in a 5K in 2019 And I had first walked most of it. And then I felt motivated to run. I said, I'm going to run. My husband said, okay. And the little one had gone out so fast that she was barely able to finish, right? And I remember coming through the finish line, and the road was on the same road where I'd walked my daughter to school before going to my oncologist appointment that year prior. And people were cheering, and they were saying my name. They were saying everyone's names over the announcements. And I just broke down in tears. And like I caught the eye of one of my friend's husbands. And so that was grief related to my breast cancer journey, right? I've kind of known that, it's not linear and it's not going to happen when you want it necessarily. So fast forward coincidentally to yesterday. So I'm here in my childhood home. We've actually just purchased it and we're cleaning it out. And to say that our parents' generation saved things is true. And so I've found a lot of things, my bassinet from when I was 6 months old, but I was going through a lot of different things related to papers and things that my mother had kept. And I started looking at the book from when we'd had the funeral. We had a book where people could write a message or a memory. And I looked at that back in February of 24, but I think I was still numb and in shock because again, in spite of her health challenges, I didn't anticipate she would pass away. So I was still shocked, very much in shock. So I think the time between then and now gave me the chance I really read the messages last night. And I mean, it was a tsunami. It was a tsunami. But I will tell you, I also didn't stop. And it was perhaps bizarre, but I wanted to keep reading the messages. And I knew I was going to continue to cry, but I wanted to see what the people had said. And I knew I needed to let it out. And that's not the first time I've cried since she passed, but that's just one timely example of how I've handled it. My husband heard, he was in the other room. He could hear me sniffling. He calls out, comes over. But yeah, I mean, I miss her and this is where the radical acceptance comes up. I miss her incredibly. Everything that's happened with my dad, I'm mad. I'm angry, right? I am not happy. But my most recent surgery, that almost put me over the edge. That was not part of the plan. And I'm very disappointed. Having said that, that's where radical acceptance comes up, right? I can be mad, but I can't try to change it. And that's where I think women in our age group, this is where I think a lot of the stress comes from, is that you're trying to change it, or you let the dissatisfaction with what's happening really affect you and get in your way. I don't have to like it, but this is where we are. And, it's coming full circle. I kind of heard about radical acceptance for many years, but it was at the PHP program my daughter went to. So her program was focused on DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, and radical acceptance is a key skill. And that's where I really dove in and thought, this is what I need to be doing. Because the resentment and the anger, it doesn't help you make any progress.
No, it lets it hold power over you, right? Instead of giving you the power to get through it. Let's dive into that, right? Let's talk about the phrase radical acceptance. Let's talk about, what does that mean to you? How did it come into play during some of your most recently overwhelming moments? Talk us through that. I know you said you learned about it in the PHP program, and then how did you start utilizing it, or how did you wrap your head around how you can use that?
Yeah, so it was definitely when my daughter went to her first treatment program for her anxiety and depression, she really didn't want to be there. And quite frankly, in hindsight, it wasn't a great fit. And I wish I had kind of paid better attention to that. Having said that, we had worked so hard to try to find her a program that when this one was open, price was reasonable, et cetera, that's where we were going. And I remember one day she was leaving and she was kind of giving the person in charge of the group that day sass. And the lady, the woman looks at her and is like, you don't have to like being here, but you're going to be here. That's what radical acceptance is. And she's like, I don't like radical acceptance, et cetera. And so that was what I thought. That's where I really started to employ it, was in encouraging her to continue the program. And then as you're using that skill, among other skills, the DBT, we as a family have adopted DBT, even though only one has officially gone through the training. We have just employed it across the board in terms of whether it's my oldest didn't get the dorm assignment that she wanted, her sophomore year. My middle had, other social challenges. And so we incorporated that as part of how we navigated many different challenges with our family. And so it wasn't a conscious effort for me as it relates to caring for my father. I think for my mom, unfortunately, because, with the breast cancer back in 96 up through her passing in 24, for some reason, I didn't have anger issues related to her health problems. And probably because I was coming off of her death, what had happened to my father and his declining health over the past 18 months, I was consciously using radical acceptance, right? Like it occurred to me, like, I really need to employ this skill because I really am unhappy about what's happening, but that's not going to do us any good. I've got to find him the right doctors. I've got to, make sure he's getting the care he needs. And so it doesn't change it, but it does help you get through it more efficiently.
It's a little bit of resilience, right? Too, of, things happen. How do we pick ourselves back up and keep going?
Yeah, I think that's another lesson that I think I'm learning trial by fire is that's this phase of life. I keep joking, and you started us off by saying this, right? People are having children later. When my grandparents were passing away, my cousins and my brother all had infants, all had babies. And so we had that circle of life that kind of made it feel like there was a balance. Well, right now in our current society and just because people are living longer and then young people aren't having children as early, right now it just feels all yucky. There's not a better word for it, right? And so you do have to be resilient. And you don't have a choice. It happens.
That's a really good point, I think, that you bring up of, we don't have precedent for this. Like there always used to be that balance. And now it's something that comes up a lot. It's like you're doing the best you can with the information and resources that you have available at that time and place, right? But also there isn't precedent for it. Sometimes I get into these conversations with my own parents sometimes where they're like, well, we did it and we didn't complain about it. And, and it's like, yes, but your generation was different. Your culture was different. Societal standards were different. We have support, but our support looks different than the support they had. Right.
Yes.
And it's just like mindsets are different. Like it's just, there's a lot of differences and we just don't have the precedent to be like, okay, you did it that way. We're going to do it that way. Because it just doesn't work. It's not going to work in the same way that it worked for them. Right. Where I do feel like what you said about like before that, it was kind of just an ebb and flow, like patternist, if that's a word. Like there was a pattern to that balance and everyone just passed down what they did or learned through and it worked.
And part of, I think the difference we have, at least in my family and probably others, is families aren't as large, right? Both of my parents had 4 siblings. And so when they were having their medical challenges as they aged, they shared that burden. And gosh, look at me saying the burden, right? But they were able to spread it around. My brother, like I mentioned, he travels the world for his job. He lives in Rhode Island where my parents were living. I live in Atlanta. It's easier for me to get to a doctor's appointment with my father than it is for my brother because of how different things are today. Back when my grandparents were getting sick, I think only one uncle on either side lived out of the state of Rhode Island. So you also had more people available. That to me is also a very big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also an East Coaster and grew up in New Jersey, and my dad was one of 5 and, my grandma was one of 7, and my grandpa was one of 7 or 8, and everybody lived within like an hour driving. And so, weekends, once a month, twice a month, I mean, you were constantly surrounded by 20 to 50 people. And it was just, okay, what's happening? What do you need? What's going on? And it was constant. And now we're all spread out. I mean, we're states apart. We're hundreds, thousands of miles apart. I always joke, like my best friends, like, everyone's going through their journeys now. We all got married. Now everyone's having babies. And it's like, we're all spread out across the country. Like I'm in Chicago, we've got New Jersey, Florida, Hawaii. Like it is just everywhere. And it's like, you can't show up in the same way that you would hope to because other factors keep you apart, right? So bring that all back. You used all these experiences, and after retiring from your communications work,
semi-retiring, my husband likes to tell me.
Semi-retiring from your communications work, you became motivated and pursued your board certification in patient advocacy.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about how, you had so many different layers of experience, from your children to yourself to your mom and now to your dad, where it's different levels of care and different types of care. How did all of that shape your decision to then go on and become a patient advocate? And then also within that, how do you now, because I know you probably do, help others, these patients, also adopt this radical acceptance and resilience and kind of understanding how to move forward?
So I would answer that part of the question first by saying I don't know that I have focused much on that radical acceptance for the people that I'm working with, right? Usually it's in a tough situation when they're reaching out and they're looking for help navigating a very challenging situation. So probably more so on the friend side is that, I have those conversations, but for people who I may not know as well personally. So in terms of what inspired this specific journey, it was when my dad was back in the hospital in late 24. It wasn't the first time it happened, but the internist said to me, "Are you in medicine?" And, having been there with myself and then my mom and navigating hospitals and et cetera, I said, "No, but I get asked that question a lot." And he said, "You should become a physician's assistant." And of course I said, "Why not a doctor?" And he said, "Because you don't have time for all that schooling, but you could become a PA pretty quickly." So I looked into it, and the cost was pretty significant. And I thought, well, I don't know that I want to do that, but I had a friend who had become a board certified patient advocate. And so I reached out to her, I looked into it, and then I studied and then I passed the exam earlier this year. And so it's been great for the time that I've been able to give to it, right? Part of this experience has been because I've cared for family members, and that hasn't stopped, right? I've been in Rhode Island almost once a month since last December to help my dad with some aspect of his care. But the patients or the families that I have been able to help, I think of one in particular where their father was in an assisted living facility and they brought in hospice, right? So hospice is end of life care. And basically the facility, he had a medical event, the facility messed up and they sent him to a hospital, and they shouldn't have. Those were costs for the family incurred. Long story short, I arranged a call for the executive director and the family. And then where I truly felt my business experience come through, and as well as communications, was after that meeting, the facility sent them a legal demand letter that basically said, like, we will cover these costs, but you have to agree never to say anything bad about it. And the client was very upset and like, "Oh my gosh." And she's like, "I don't have time to get back to them today." And I said, "You do not have to get back to them today. This is your timeline. We'll come back to this in a week and we will talk more." So that was where I felt like the perfect combination of my business communications and patient advocacy experiences came together, because I knew from negotiations for over 20 years in business, like, it's a negotiation. They sent you a demand, but you don't have to reply right away.
Right. The ball's in your court.
Yeah, that was probably one of my more fulfilling experiences because you could just feel the tension dissipate. She thought she got this letter. She thought she had to respond that day. She herself has a big job and was like, no, we get back to them later.
Fantastic, much necessary work that you're doing. So thank you for that. I've spent almost a decade working in the hospitals. And so, we love our patient advocacy team. We try and advocate as much as we can. We educate our patients on how to advocate for themselves because a lot of them don't have these family members who can advocate for them, right? And then getting them patient advocates if we feel like they really need one. And so I think that's just phenomenal. What have you, if anything, do you feel like between all of the roles and even in the patient advocacy work, what have you learned about boundaries or the lack of them when you're in this sandwiched position between generations, but also maybe not even for yourself, but like with your patients?
I mean, boundaries is another area that I did not focus on early enough through all these experiences. And, stress and moments of burnout definitely have shown up for me. And I realized that boundaries are not just about the boundary you're putting on what you will do for other people. It's the boundary of what people are going to take and need from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I had decent boundaries for what I was willing to do for my dad in his care, but yet my brother was continuing to infiltrate and ask and ask and ask and ask, and I was answering and answering and answering and answering, right? And so I needed to stop answering. I needed to stop replying to his text right away. And that, it wasn't just, and I talk to my daughters about this a lot, is boundaries are two-way. It is not just what you're not willing to do for others, because that's what I think a lot of people think of as the boundary. Is like, oh, I'm going to set a boundary. I'm not going to do that today. But it's also how much are you willing to let people take from you and making sure you have clear boundaries in that regard. I say all that. I sound really good. I'm still practicing. I'm definitely still a work in progress.
It's hard. When you explained that about your brother, it is a perfect match with my brother lives with my parents and my grandma. So everything I said earlier about flying home 5 times, like, I'd call and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, I don't know. And it's like, you're in the same house. What do you mean you don't know? Like, can you go knock on the door? Like, can you go check on their bedroom? Like, can you, and for us, it's definitely more cultural and upbringing and like all of that stuff too. But it's one of those things of like, hey, we were born and raised here. Like you've been surrounded by the culture here. Like, I don't understand why this is so difficult. Like, why do I need to take time off of work and fly home for this? Right. Granted, I have the medical knowledge, the jargon, the patient advocacy that I can do, which is great, but I can do that over the phone.
Right. And it's socioeconomic too, right? We have the means to jump on a plane and do that.
Yeah, I always mention that too. I'm like, you don't understand how privileged we are that I have the ability to jump on a plane and come out when something happens, right? But can you imagine, like, if I had young kids or if I had a full-time job where I couldn't get off?
Right.
These little things. But when you were saying that earlier about, just the dynamics between daughters and sons and how they show up for parents. And this is something that we talk about a lot culturally too. But yeah, it was very relatable when you said
And
that.
the question I have is like, 2 questions, I suppose, is the first is, how's it going for families who don't have that ability, right? Are those siblings who are closer figuring it out, even if it isn't their natural skill set? And the second is like, it's a boundary thing. Why? And I think is what you're suggesting too, culturally, like, why do we feel like we have to jump on a plane and get back when something's going on? And that's a question I ask myself. And I don't know that I would do it differently. I mean, I definitely, the times that I was with my mom when she was in the hospital are some of the most tender moments we had. At the same time, there's been other situations when I've had to come up And I don't feel like I necessarily should have.
Yeah, I think it's a toss up. It's hard. Yeah, tough conversations. There are times where I'm like, oh, I probably didn't need to come home for that. Like recently my mom had a total shoulder surgery and she's like, we've got it. Like, you don't need to come home. Like, we know, because I was having surgery the same week. And she was like, you're good. I don't like, we'll figure it out. Like, don't worry about it. They're in a much better place right now than they were like last year or the year before. And so I was like, okay. But I had to have like a very strict conversation with my brother of like, hey, I'm not coming home. I need you to check up on this, But I think it's a trust thing. Like, I feel like sometimes it's more of like it's a boundary thing, but also like letting it go, like letting your hold over it go a little bit and being like, I know that you might not do the job as well as I would want you to, but if you're getting it done, I need to let you do it.
Yes.
Right. And that's hard.
And though a lot of what we are doing, there isn't a quality aspect of it, right? Just being at the hospital, right? Dad's terrified. He's got a brain bleed. What's happening? Like, just being there. I don't believe that I've necessarily done anything better than anyone else involved overall, right? I think there have been times when I've had to intervene, but by and large, most of what I've done, anyone can do. And to that point, so I mentioned my father's declining health, and he went from walking 4 miles a day this time last year and he's 80, he just turned 82 this week. He was walking 4 miles a day this time last year. He's now in a wheelchair. So the normal pressure hydrocephalus plus Parkinson's, plus he got COVID, all of it, right? Just horrible. We went up and did the evaluation to see if he would be a candidate for the shunt. They can do a shunt in the brain that drains the excess fluid out. And so neural pressure affects your ability to walk, urinary incontinence, emotional regulation, and cognition overall. And so by January of 25, my father was unable to walk at all, like fully in a wheelchair. This is someone who ran 3 marathons, right? So we go up, I fly up, we go up to the clinic in Providence. Or is he a candidate for the surgery? We like a day-long evaluation. The next day I'm driving to the airport to fly home, and they call me with his date they're like, congratulations, yes, he's a candidate. His date for his surgery is April 8th. That was the week of spring break that I had booked a cruise for just me and my daughter. We had missed the prior 2 spring breaks. The 2 prior years, whatever we had planned for, and they weren't big. One was a college tour with our middle daughter, and I'm blanking. Oh, then the other one, we didn't even book anything because she was in the 30-day PHP. She missed spring break 2 years in a row because of her mental health challenges. And so here I am, like, I won't be able to be there. I can't come up for the surgery. Now, not for a minute did I think I should cancel. We were going with another mother and daughter. So for a moment, I thought maybe my husband will go, but I'm like, well, that's weird because it's another mother and daughter. And my father was the one who said, do not come home. We've got this. And then one of my mother's best friends worked in nursing care for her career. And so she too said, you are absolutely not coming home. We've got this. But that was a moment of like, oh my gosh. I mean, and I will say, like, I do feel guilty that, I was there for the vast majority of Mom's major things. I wasn't there for his. But on that note, though, so in terms of like, okay, brother, you've got to do this. I didn't think we had international cell service. So I told him he had to just like text me updates. So I was getting regular text updates. Well, lo and behold, I did have cell service because the morning after Dad's surgery, I wake up to what I think is an alarm, like a wake up alarm. And I look on my phone and it's my dad calling me, and he's crying because they got him he walked after the surgery. So, that's a blessing and a curse, I guess. But it's like, oh, I don't have international cell service. Well, I actually did, which is great because I got to hear from my father. But I didn't tell anybody else that I had that. So I was able to keep that boundary up.
Yeah, you do what you got to do.
That was a tough moment of, can I take her on this vacation that I feel like she deserved? Or how do I handle Dad's surgery? And it went just fine.
It is hard. A lot of feelings there on guilt and all of that too, that, we try to unpack in our caregiver coaching stuff, but it is hard. I think all of this to say, like, it's not easy, but there is a way to keep going. Things do work out, and really tapping into the people and the support and everything that you can have access to, if you have access to it. Before we wrap up, many caregivers in this sandwich generation describe feeling invisible. What do you wish more people understood about what it takes to hold that dual role?
Wow. It's rare that I don't have something to say right away.
As a communications expert, yeah.
I know. Well, I think I'm reflecting because I do feel incredibly supported, particularly as it relates to my dad. The nursing home where he is, they say all the time, like, wow, you guys are such a great family. You're there for him. I laughed when you said many people say they're invisible. It brought me back to a family party that I brought my father to last October. And there were large extended family, like dozens of people there. And my one aunt comes to seek me out and she's like, he says only you can get him his food. Right. So I was like, well, I wasn't invisible there. Right. Like he made it known. Oh, Amy's going to make my plate.
Maybe that's it, right? Maybe it's, if you're going to be in that role where you need to cater to both ends, you need people in your corner who know that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I think I wish people knew how meaningful it is to reach out and provide support to the caregiver, even when they don't necessarily ask for it. One time I was here cleaning out the house and one of my aunts just showed up with snacks and food and drinks and said, let's take a break and have a snack and a drink. So I wish people knew that even the smallest outreach can have a huge impact.
Yeah. There are so many other questions and conversations that we didn't get to. I think we could have probably talked for 2 hours here. What message would you offer to others in the sandwich generation who are feeling stretched thin or emotionally spent, but they're still trying to stay grounded in purpose and, trying to still show up for everybody who needs them?
Yeah. What I want everyone to know, and it's what I try to articulate through my various TikTok videos, is, my handle there is BS Sandwich Mom. I'm calling BS on what the perception of the sandwich generation is, right? That is, it's all great. We're handling everything. And as it relates to radical acceptance, I want more people to know that you can complain about it, that it does suck. It is not fair. And then you're going to go and you're going to take the person to the appointment. But trying to hold that in, and we've had a lot of conversations about that in our family, because I think, particularly aunts and uncles who see the griping a little bit as like complaining about my father. No, I'm not. But I'm allowed to be unhappy that I had to find a Panera Bread for us to go to the bathroom to, and then I had to wash his underwear in the sink. Like, that sucks. And I am allowed to say it sucks. And the poor guy, he didn't want that either. And right. I would do it for him 1,000,000 times over.
Yeah. It's not about the person, it's the situation.
Right. And so I think that's what I hope more people understood about the sandwich generation is it's not easy and we're going to complain, but we're going to continue to do it to get it done.
Yeah. It's about being real and not putting on shows, right? Or false images. Amy, thank you so much for sharing your journey and everything that you have to offer. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to see how people receive this episode.
Yes, same. Thank you, doctor. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Aging Together podcast. This episode was produced by me, Dr. Pooja A. Patel, in partnership with Natural Eye Media, and is supported by our Season 4 sponsor, Safety Grip by Heart Mobility. To learn more about them, check out our sponsor spotlight episode. If today's conversation helped you, please follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a quick rating or review. Your support keeps the podcast free, at light, and growing. Want more? Join our live sessions every other Wednesday and unlock the subscriber-only audio replays through the link in the show notes. Until next time, let's keep learning and aging together. Take care.
Aging, illness, and injury can make the simplest movements feel daunting. That's why Safety Grip was designed with compassion at its core. Its deep, textured surface offers real control, especially for hands weakened by arthritis, neuropathy, or stroke, helping restore not just safety, but dignity. Because when you or someone you love needs support, it should feel like someone's there to help. Visit heartmobility.com to learn more.